the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Benton. It is vampires, and there's a host of damned souls at Pelham House.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I almost pulled an Irene there and almost flubbed the beginning. She would really tear me a new one for that, but unfortunately she's a little under the weather, so not able to join us tonight. So let's wish her well, and hopefully she'll be back for the next show. I think I wore her out when I was over there, running around all these different castles and going to Stonehenge and all these other places. I'll be honest with you, I wish I was still over there. I had such a good time. It was phenomenal actually doing a show sitting across the table from Irene in the flesh. And I know I've mentioned this before, for those of you who don't know, because Irene and I have been working together for well over 10 years on not only this radio station, but various projects. And yet when I went over there, the beginning of August, that was the first time we ever got to meet in person. So that was an exceptional treat and felt perfectly natural. And quite honestly, I think they would love it if I moved over there, which is very tempting. So in any case, I'm back in the States and moving forward. And we have our guest for tonight. I'm really fascinated and ready to talk to this guest. So our guest tonight is Wayne Saalman. Now, Wayne was born in Ohio. He's a novelist, poet, painter, musician, and songwriter. But he is also very much a philosopher, metaphysician, and he's traveled the globe, studied the roots of humanities, many religions, spiritual traditions, and numerous secret societies. For decades, he's immersed himself in the writings of the world's philosophers, mystics, yogis, and wisdom masters. And he has a new book out called The Journey Across Forever, a magical, provocative odyssey across the ages, around the world, and into the great beyond. So, Wayne, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's lovely to be here.
Now, you're originally from Ohio, but you're now living over in Ireland?
That's correct. Yeah, I've been here about 25 years or so now. My wife is Irish. And so, yeah, we were together in the States for many years. I lived in San Francisco about 15 years or so. I've also lived in Australia, Boulder, Colorado, and a few other places we won't go into here, but I've done a lot of traveling, all right. And but this is where where the journey has brought me to, shall we say.
I'm amazed you haven't picked up the Irish accent.
No, I wouldn't attempt that. Now, you have to stay genuine to your roots, is my opinion on that.
See, I'm a chameleon. Whenever I go places and I get immersed in a culture, if it has a different accent, I just naturally start acquiring it. I spent a month in Oklahoma once working on a movie, and I came back with the worst Midwestern twang that took me about a whole month to be able to get rid of. Didn't pick up the English while I was over there because there's so many different accents depending on where you're at, especially where I was in Wales. So
Ireland's like that, by the way. You have like areas where the accents are very different. So it's quite interesting to learn to recognize where a person's from just from their accent here.
True, with all the different counties and different sections of, I mean, you could travel over to the next county over and they're speaking completely different. So let's talk a little bit. You've got your book, Journey Across Forever. You're an author not only of nonfiction, but fiction books as well.
Yes, my first 4 books are fiction, and they are thrillers with a lot of metaphysical and spiritual things woven into them, but at the same time, because they're thrillers, there's a lot of the dark side there as well. But I think, we're holistic beings, and we live in a very dualistic world, so you've got the light and the dark, the good and the evil. And I tried to make the Journey Across Forever reflect that as well, because there's so many things that can be disturbing in our world, as everyone knows. Like America right now is very divided politically. And there's just so many different ways of looking at life, but there's always going to be this broad spectrum with the light and the dark and the good and the evil at each end. And so I wanted to make the Journey Across Forever entertaining, though, at the same time. So there's great depth and profound insights, a lot of travel adventures, though, as well, and a look at the light side and the dark side throughout the book.
So what started you on this metaphysical journey to get to this point? Because, I mean, looking at your bio and with your books, you've traveled the world looking into all sorts of different religions and philosophies. What spurred all that in you?
I think that it all began when I was still very young, and I noticed that I was dreaming quite a bit about flying, and these flying dreams were recurring. And as the years went on, I would make greater and greater effort to rise up higher and higher in the sky, and they were really intriguing to me. And then when I was around 10 or 11, one day my brother and I were throwing a baseball back and forth in our front yard. It was the middle of the day, a sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, when a small round flying disc came right over the top of our roof. We were in the front yard, so it came from the back side of the house, flew over, and it was a beautiful round flying disc with 2 people aboard. They looked totally human to me, but in retrospect, I have a great wonderment about that, because I've never seen an object like this again in all these years. So that particular incident stuck with me for many years. And
can I ask you? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
could I ask you a few questions about that? Now,
yeah, sure.
How close was the craft to you, and how, in order for you to be able to see through a window or whatnot of these people?
No, all right. Let me explain. This was not what you'd call a typical flying saucer. It was more like a shuttlecraft that was a flat, round disc with a railing around it. And these people were actually standing at the back railing.
Wow.
Yeah, and they looked like 2 characters out of Star Trek in retrospect, like brown, kind of space age uniforms. And they were so low in the sky, if I had a really strong pitcher's arm, I think I could have hit them with the baseball. They were that low in the sky. And we looked up, we were surprised, but we waved at them and they waved back at us. And there wasn't a sound to be heard, no engine noises or anything like that. And quite curiously, their hair was not flying about all wild. when they're right out in the open air at this back railing. So I've concluded in time, after much reading, which I was stimulated by this to read a lot of UFO literature, I've decided that these were maybe humanoids and not just normal human beings. Because, as I say, I've never seen such a craft again. And, there's no pictures of such craft and so forth. There was one incident in New Guinea, which kind of resembles it. For people who are into UFO literature, they'll recognize what I'm talking about. There was a father, I can't think of his name at the moment, but it was like 37 witnesses to a craft that hovered in the sky and had a railing around it that way. And these beings were on there doing something. And the priest and the others with him waved at these figures, and they waved back. So that's, in one of Jacques Vallée's books. If anybody wants to look it up, I think the place is called Boenai in New Guinea. But that stimulated my interest, and I really, from a young age, started reading about UFOs and really had a curiosity about that. So
I do want. I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but no. I wanted to make a point before we got too much further. You talked about your flying dreams.
Yeah.
Okay. I have had flying dreams most of my life, not many lately, but let me tell you something. I learned over time that I freaking love flying in my dreams. I mean, now I thought that meant I could also I can get on an airplane, no problem. But I thought, maybe I try learning how to fly. And I took a flying lesson once, and being in that cramped little cockpit of that crappy plane scared the living daylights out of me. And I realized you just have so much more freedom in your quote unquote dreams. And you know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Of actual flying and going and wherever you want it's the most amazing experience.
Yes, really. And I'm not, I never tried to become a pilot either, but quite interestingly, my first novel was inspired by these flying dreams, and it's entitled The Dream Illuminati. And I was inspired from reading Robert Anton Wilson's work on his Cosmic Trigger book, especially, was a huge influence on me. And it was his publisher, which is Falcon Press, that accepted my first novel, which was actually named Vimana initially. And the Vimanas, as some may know, are flying craft from India, from the ancient days in the Vedanta Vedic traditions. They have in the Bhagavad Gita and some of those books, they talk about these flying machines called Vimanas. So I was intrigued by that. I tied that into my own flying dreams, and then having seen the craft that I saw at 10 or 11 years of age. So all of that, I came up with like a fictional group of people who were living their flying dreams. So they had personal jetpacks, and they started buying up old churches and having rituals and all kinds of things going on, and they were living out their dreams of flying.
Fantastic. Now, with the as we call them, UAPs these days, not just flying saucers, and because UFO, I guess, has taken on so much of you mentioned UFO, automatically everybody thinks alien spaceships, and so now the new phrase is UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon. Because let's face it, some things that people see in the sky don't look like physical craft. There's the plasmic kind of orbs that have been seen, other types of lights in the sky. Now, you had an encounter not once, but twice?
True. when I was 14 or 15, somewhere in that range, I was walking with a friend in our neighborhood. We lived in the country, but there was a group of houses together and, a lot of open fields and things. And we were walking toward my friend's house. It was nighttime, very dark, stars were out, no clouds. But a strange craft came flying very low in the sky again toward us as we were crossing this field. And this was a very strange encounter, to say the least, which I describe in my book, The Journey Across Forever. But I think it's significant for a reason, because it is so strange. And that is, this vehicle kind of came cruising in. Again, not a sound, just very silent. It was a large, kind of oval object. And the thing that startled us, we were looking up at it and we were thinking, what is this? This is, it had no wings, it definitely wasn't an airplane or a helicopter, but it was just cruising along, just this oval object. And suddenly, the two of us had the absolute realization that this object had become aware of us. And this happens if you read UFO literature, where there is this sense that the thing is aware of you. Mm-hmm. And it startled us. And we broke into a run, but the thing turned suddenly it just made a complete turn as if it was following us. So again, we're very upset and worried about this. But then, very strangely, the thing on top broke into flames. And we could hear the crackling of the fire. It was that low to the ground. And then in an instant, it was just snuffed out, which was really weird. And the thing just kept floating across the sky with trailing smoke and disappeared into the distance. So, you talk about high strangeness, and some people say this is the true sign of this otherness, this otherworldly kind of intrusion from an interdimensional, possibly, group of entities. We don't know, but I didn't see anyone aboard that night, but it was very dark. But that was a very absurd and strange encounter.
It almost sounds like the craft had a malfunction of some kind.
Yeah.
Possibly, or like you said, it was doing something that's just beyond our comprehension, which in most cases is true, because there's so much of this type of phenomena that currently is beyond our comprehension. We think we're at the pinnacle of science. We think we know. Science thinks it knows almost everything these days, and quite frankly, they don't have a clue about reality.
Well, that's the thing about the UAPs. I think the military is only admitting that they're real now, but they don't know. They don't know what these things are, who's in control of them. They certainly don't know if they're friendly or they're not. And so all these questions, they don't want to admit publicly that they have no clue how to control this phenomenon or how to deal with it. But they are finally at least admitting, and they have shown some videos like the famous TikTok video now. But these objects, they defy the physics as we know them, and that's a very strange thing. So yeah, they're very, very complex and mysterious objects.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, most of these objects tend to exhibit an intelligence, and in some cases, let's say if we're talking about some of these more plasma-like anomalies that don't look like traditional nuts and bolts craft, and yet they still behave and maneuver with intelligence. They can react to you and your thoughts or intentions. People have called out to them. I know with Dr. Stephen Greer and his CE5 program, people putting out their intentions to connect with these types of craft or phenomena, and they get responses from them. So
you may have heard of
glowing
Chris,
orb of.
You may have heard of Chris Bledsoe. Like, he seems to be able to practically see them on a daily basis now, or a nightly basis.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Chris. Yeah, it's almost like, the same type of phenomenon that they keep encountering at Skinwalker Ranch, which the television show is, which I think is fantastic in its own way of showing this type of strange phenomenon.
Right.
And how hard it is for modern science to even categorize it.
I know. The foreword of my book, The Journey Across Forever, was written by Colonel John B. Alexander.
John Alexander, okay,
yeah,
yes.
And has his own books like Reality Denied and UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities, which I highly recommend. But he also has been associated with the Skinwalker Ranch, and like what he describes in one of his books about how there was like a portal that just appeared that these people that were there were able to see, and a strange creature crawled out of this portal, a big hairy thing of some kind, and just
kind of looked like Bigfoot.
Yeah, trudged off, and so I'm starting to think like the psychoanalyst Carl Jung used the word psychoid, which I find intriguing because he was kind of saying this is a realm sort of between mind and matter, the psychoid realm. So I'm starting to think that perhaps a better description might be unidentified psychoid phenomena to kind of encompass everything like what's going on at the Skinwalker Ranch, as well as these flying objects, because not all of these objects are aerial phenomena, And another possibility might be unidentified plasmic phenomena. So I'm reading a book now about plasma as the fourth state of matter, and it's quite intriguing, the idea that that there is some kind of material constitution to these things, but it's so fine and subtle that we mostly don't see it with the naked eye at all.
No, and yet also I know of people who have experienced these light phenomena, not just viewing them in the sky, but people walking in the woods, certain locations where this phenomena appears at ground level. And a few paranormal hotspot locations where people have seen and videotaped these lights. They can be like red or green or orange, just moving through the woods. And whenever they try to follow it, it moves away or disappears.
Yeah.
I myself have seen a formation of orange globes, for lack of a better term, flying past me in the early evening. There were about 15 or 20 of them in a line, not in a straight line. They were following each other, but it was a loose formation. They were all moving individually. They made no noise that I could tell. I was stuck in my car in traffic, so I couldn't get out or film them, much to my annoyance. They weren't very far away from me, but they were traveling from west to east in a straight line, and they weren't drones. They didn't have any FFA lighting on them whatsoever. And again, I rolled down my window. They made no noise. And so you can honestly say it's an unidentified aerial phenomenon. Can I tell you what they were? Nope. But I saw them on one other occasion too, just down in here at the Jersey Shore a couple years ago. My wife and my sister-in-law were with me at the time, and we all three saw them coming up the beach and then moving out over the ocean. They came in pairs, about two at a time, come up the beach and then make a right turn, go out into the ocean, and disappear in the cloud layer. All orange globes.
Wow.
Never been able to explain those.
Wow. Brilliant. So you saw they were orange globes on both occasions.
Yes, they looked identical to what I saw both times.
Oh, wow.
My wife was convinced that they were military in nature, and I'm sitting there going, no, these are not military.
Yeah, I don't think so. Otherwise, I think there would be some kind of record somewhere, or videos or something of them.
Mm-hmm.
It eventually gets out. But there's some very mysterious things going on in our world, isn't there?
Well, here's my take on it, and you can tell me your thoughts, because I think this fits in perfectly with your book and your research. Is I have been of the opinion in the last few years, I've been researching the paranormal for almost 20 years, and the last several years, my way of thinking has completely changed, where most of the phenomenon that all seems separate is actually related, and that our perception of reality is so extremely narrow. We just don't have the senses or the abilities to sense everything that's around us all the time. It's like the light spectrum. If you look at the full light spectrum, visible light takes up a sliver of that spectrum. Yet
that's correct. Yeah, just
there's
slivers, right.
Things going out on both sides, going all the way out to the infrared and to the ultraviolet, different radio frequencies and radiation and all of this stuff. But it's all part of the light spectrum. I think what we are able to perceive here in the physical reality of our everyday lives, first of all, we're trained since childhood to ignore most of it. That can't be real. Don't think about that. Don't look at that man behind the curtain. And yet so many people have all these experiences, which shows that there is something measurable that is going on that is just as much a part of our reality as air.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk about the paranormal and the supernatural, but I think there's a dimension of the natural world that, like you say, that we're just not aware of because, we have limited sensing of capabilities, and we are all acculturated people who are, we learn to see things a certain way and to describe things a certain way, and when these anomalies come along, we're just completely lost to describe them properly or to understand what they are. But I think they are part of the natural world.
Mm-hmm. They're part of a reality that we are all members of, but for whatever reason, whether it was intentional or not intentional, because obviously some people are more in tune and in touch and able to see this type of phenomenon. My friend Irene, my co-host, is very, very sensitive to these types of energies and phenomenon. And other people aren't. And I think a lot of it's been programmed out of us, whether biologically a long time ago or just in the way that we grow up in Western society.
Yeah. And I think another aspect of this has to do with when we leave the body. Some people have out-of-body experiences, and very convincing out-of-body experiences where they saw certain things, like the famous shoe on the roof that a particular person had seen, and then was able to prove that shoe was way up, on the roof somewhere of the hospital. But I think it all does tie into the other world of legend, the Avalon, or even the idea of heaven, And I do think that we are spiritual entities primarily who, upon leaving the physical body, enter a dimension which we think of as the afterlife. And I have quite a few chapters in the book about the afterlife, and I postulate that what we have here is a new paradigm of reality based on all these people that have had near-death experiences. And one of the people who endorsed my book was Whitley Strieber.
Mm-hmm.
And he recently, in one of his newer books, wrote how he had left out a certain aspect of a thing he saw when he wrote his famous book, Communion. He didn't put it in the book, Communion, because it made no sense to him at the time, he said. But in this newer book, I think it's called A New World, he wrote about how he had seen a deceased friend on one of those spacecraft.
Very familiar with Whitley and his background in that story.
And I was listening to an interview with Robert Bigelow and Jeffrey Mishlove there yesterday, and they were saying how the whole UAP or UFO mystery seems to be tied into this other dimension to do with the afterlife, very much, So yeah, I'd have a lot about that in the book and tie it all together. And then there's another story I'll tell you, which when we think of, we are carnate beings or incarnate beings, and then there are discarnate beings, which, you might think of ghosts, for example, but I think spirits that transition, from the body into this other world are discarnate entities, and a lot of them were formerly human, and maybe some of them, were never human. But when I was living in Australia, I was traveling across the country from Perth back to Melbourne, where I was living at the time. And it's a very long journey. Australia is as big as the continental United States, so anybody who's made cross-country journeys across America knows how those wide open spaces can be and how tiring it can be. So I got almost to Adelaide from Perth and decided I had a whole nother day to travel to Melbourne. So I just took a road, just a random road down to the ocean, and set up camp there for the night. So it was early afternoon, and I went exploring, and I just love shells and rocks and things, so I always like to go and look for these kinds of things as things of interest that way. And I noticed a cave, and it was a very low opening to the cave, but when I peeked in, I could see light inside the cave, which, looked really interesting, and it was a curious thing to see. So I crawled into the cave, and basically at high tide, I assume it was a blowhole. So the cave had an opening in its roof, and in the middle of that sunny patch was a long oblong stone with kind of crisscrossing bands on it. So it's about as long as my forearm. It was a sizable rock. But I thought, this is really cool. I really like this rock. And I assumed that because it had been rolled in the surf for could be centuries or millenniums for all we know, that it was a natural object. And so I took it with me. Now, what's interesting is that the next day, I drove home to Melbourne, and I was just put things in the bedroom, including that stone, and I took a shower, sat back on the bed to read a book, and after a little bit of time of reading, I happened to look up, and I noticed the whole top of the room was full of mist. And this was especially evident around the green Chinese lantern shade that hung in the middle of the room. And I had to wonder if there was some kind of fire or something. So I began trying to look into that and find out what was going on. But the room was very, very misty. And then I happened to notice that there was this large spiral spinning around over by the old Victorian fireplace.
Mm.
And it was about as big as the upper half of my body, so it was a sizable spiral. And there was a clock beside the bed, so for a solid hour, I watched this spiral, and I kind of tried to communicate and wondering, I could just sort of sense an intelligence there. And at one point, the spiral came toward me, and it entered me and swirled around inside me. I kind of got the impression that it was checking me out,
Wow.
Yeah, and then it backed up and it went back to the little area it had been in, but near the fireplace. And then there was a car engine that started up outside, and it was kind of loud and close to the house, so seemed to trigger some kind of new dynamic at that moment. And the spiral started crackling, and then it shot up through the ceiling of the bedroom. And in an absolute instant, the room just cleared out. All the mist just absolutely vanished. And so that was an amazing, experience all by itself. But there was a lot more to it than I realized at the time. A few days later, this Australian couple came over, friends, and they looked at the stone and they said, "This is an Aboriginal artifact."
Mm-hmm.
They thought it was. They weren't sure. But they said, "I think you're not supposed to take any Aboriginal artifact from wherever you find it or happen to come across it." So I was curious then, and I happened to go into an Aborigine shop about a week later, and they were selling didgeridoos and boomerangs and all that kind of stuff. And there was an Aborigine woman in there tending the shop. So I told her about it, and she said, "It does sound like an Aboriginal artifact." And she said, "Now, I have a friend who's a professor at the University of Melbourne,
Mm-hmm.
and he would know. So, if you bring me the stone, I'll show it to him, and we'll see what he says." So I did that. I brought her the stone. She took it to the professor. And a day or two after that, I got a phone call from her, and she said, I'm sorry. I had to give the stone away." And I was like, "Why? What happened?" And she said the professor did identify it as an Aboriginal artifact. In fact, she said it's a charinga, a power stone. And suddenly I connected the spinning spiral, with this stone. And my point here is, I think what I experienced was a discarnate being from the dream time. So absolutely fascinating. The Aborigine Society of South Australia sent 2 Aborigine shaman to collect that stone. They flew them to Melbourne for this stone. That's how important it was to them, because the professor had identified it as such. So it was a charinga, a power stone, and apparently this discarnate entity from the dream time was residing in that stone. And it was invisible except for the fact that this mist had just come out of nowhere and filled the room. And if there hadn't been the mist, I wouldn't have known that this entity was even there. So that's one of the fascinating stories in the book. And it really convinced me that there are discarnate beings and that the Aborigines are on the right track, believing that there is a dream time, like we come from it and we return to it. So that's their word, I think, for the other world of legend, the Avalon or Valhalla, whatever word you might want to use for this other world. Some would say heaven, but the afterlife, the hereafter, etc.
Well, your story has really struck a chord with me right now. I've studied shamanism through some shamanic practitioner training that I went through a few years ago. I really feel the Aboriginal people of Australia have probably one of the oldest cultures in the world, but also are very much in tune, not only with nature, but of all of these other, I hate using the word spiritual energies because I think it goes far beyond just thinking in spiritual terms. These other doorways to other worlds, other dimensions. A lot of times you'll see, even in Native American pictographs and artwork, they always use spirals, just like you described. Aborigines in their artwork and cave drawings have the spirals.
And if I may interject, there are in fact thousands of spirals etched into stone in Australia, as it turns out. They're called petroglyphs. And they are all over the country. So that is their depiction of a Dreamtime entity, I believe.
Yes, a Dreamtime entity, or possibly even a portal.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah. I know that recently with the Skinwalker Ranch, they had discovered petroglyphs from the Ute and Navajo people who occupied the area, and they even have on top of the mesa a stone monolith structure in a spiral.
Wow.
And they also had spirals on the petroglyphs, and which they're starting to lean towards the idea of that, interpreting that as a type of portal or a vortex of energy of some point. And I think it's very important, considering how many cultures across the world have used that type of imagery. I believe there's even old caveman art, going back to prehistoric times, when they find these ancient cave arts that also have the spiral.
Yeah, and Ireland here, where I live now, also has spirals on stone. And some of their more famous ancient structures, So the sacred spiral does seem to be a universal motif, doesn't it?
It does. You're also talking about with the other side, the other realm, whatever. One way I look at it is we don't come from here. We're here. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. We come from that other realm. We are obtain this consciousness in these bodies for the short time we're here for these physical experiences, and when it's done, you go right back to where you came from. Sometimes even coming back multiple times, depending on the experiences you need, because there's certain experiences that they really can't experience in those other dimensions and realities that you can experience here in the third physical dimension.
Right. Yeah, it's very true. And I have multiple chapters in the book about why I think that we're here for spiritual enrichment. And you're so correct that we do need the material world for some experiences to be, life and death experiences that will enrich you, whether it's even negative things can constitute a very huge learning lesson for you, a spiritual lesson. And of course, we all deal with the death of our loved ones, and our own demise looms in the future. And so, yeah, you're very correct about that, I think. And I think it's what the returnees from the near-death experience tell us about what goes on in the afterlife does constitute a new paradigm for us. And if we heed the lessons they give us, which I have a lot about that in the Journey Across Forever. We can improve our future tremendously, and in fact, we can grow the soul and we can become enlightened if we are really attentive to our karma. And you alluded to reincarnation there. I think it's a very real phenomenon in that we come back to this world if we need more lessons of a certain type or a very specific lesson, and that all of that apparently is planned out ahead of time before we even are born.
Yeah, it's people sometimes in this lifetime, especially people who've experienced very horrible things, and they sit there and they think, why me? Or they get mad and blame God, or they want to know, why is this happening? And it's sometimes living in this existence is very, very, very tough. And yet there's been a lot of work with hypnotherapists like Dolores Cannon, Dr. Leo Sprinkle, even Dr. John Mack, who, have, when they've done these hypnotic regressions on people, even the work of Dr. Brian Weiss, that people, before they come into these lifetimes, they're like all excited and joyfully planning all of these bad things that's going to happen to them because they're excited for the experience. Now, while we're here, I'm not going to lie, it sucks. And
it can suck.
It's no fun. I mean, I've gone through some incredible trauma in the last several months that, trust me, it, I use humorous terms, it blows chunks. But at the same time, I also recognize the lessons that I have learned during all of this time, during all the past instances of bad times I went through, or let's say mistakes I think I made. And I realize now every one of those things happened to bring me to where I am at this moment in time, which right now I'm on the pinnacle of a brand new, whatever you want to call it, adventure, life path. What things are starting new that led everything I experienced up to this moment has brought me here.
Exactly. That's
and
huge realization that everyone should come to, and that is all of the grief they may suffer or whatever has happened, to understand what happened and to really deeply and profoundly meditate on it, contemplate it, ruminate on it, and understand what the spiritual lesson is there. And you will be enriched from that experience, even if it was horrible while it was going on.
Well, let me ask you your thoughts on the difference between the spiritual and the religious.
Well, I am one of those people that distinguishes them very distinctly. I think religion is institutionalized spirituality, but it's secondhand for most people. It's not firsthand experience. And I think spirituality, to understand it to any degree, really, you must experience things directly. And it's very, very important that you go your own way, do your own thing. I belong to no particular religion, although I did grow up Catholic, but we've seen some of the things that have occurred with the priests and the nuns and so forth. And like institutionalized religion can be stifling to the spirit. And these hardcore doctrination kind of things, I just think it's people imposing their will, people of authority who become self-appointed authority, I must say, that they're imposing their will on others and they're trying to control others. And I just believe in being a free spirit. I believe strongly, and this is throughout my book, The Journey Across Forever, I talk about spiritual liberation. So freeing yourself of what's your cultural conditioning, your compulsions, all the indoctrinations that go along with religion and with politics as well. Our ethics and morals come from our spiritual base, our spiritual foundation. So it's important to really dig deep into yourself. And I think, it's almost a cliche now, but the ultimate beauty of life is in love, and it's in compassion, being kind and compassionate to our fellow human beings. And I'll say this as well, this is a key insight, and that is that those who have had a near-death experience, almost invariably they have had a life review where they not only saw their life flash before their eyes again, but they felt everything they felt. And even more importantly, they felt how they made others feel. So they felt the emotions of all those around them who they influenced in some way or affected in some way. And I call this the ultimate karmic moment, where everything we do comes back to us during this life review. And many have said it can be excruciating to realize how you made other people feel. But of course, there's the positive side as well. So the more kind you are, the more compassionate you are, the more loving you are, the more beautiful that life review is going to be. And you're going to feel good about yourself rather than maybe ashamed of some of the things you did and so forth.
Well, I can tell you that I am very familiar with that concept. I am sure not looking forward to mine. Now, yes, in the end, it's all about the overall experiences and what you learn from it. You judge yourself. You're not like going to be sitting under a panel of judges or God.
Right,
and if you didn't do enough, you're going to hell. I mean,
right. We judge ourselves. That's what it comes down to.
And it comes down to
the beings of light that accompany these people who have had the near-death experience are very loving beings. Like, they just radiate love and warmth and kindness and compassion, but they help you through it, and they help you see exactly how you lived your life.
Mm-hmm. And if you're coming back, what alterations or changes or different experiences you may need, depending on the life that you lived.
Yeah,
or hey, you may be done. You may not need to come back here.
Well, you may not, and apparently that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well,
although I love this life, I think it's been incredible, to have traveled the world and met all the people I've met and so forth. It is an incredible life, any way you look at it. But some people have very, terrible things happen to them, and then you got things like war going on and murder and all these things. Very dark energies, which you want to steer well clear of, and meditate, open yourself to the light, and just be kind. Be kind.
We're getting close to the end here, but there is one of the talking points that was sent over that piqued my interest, and I wanted to ask you about it, which is the Martian Odyssey.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my fourth fiction novel is a thriller about, and it was inspired by, I saw a newspaper ad one day, or not an ad, I'm sorry, a newspaper story, saying that over 1,000 people had applied with this Mars One group that was hoping to become the first to blast off for Mars and set up the first interplanetary human colony there. Mm-hmm. So I thought, now that's amazing, like that over 1,000 people would want to go there to this freezing cold planet that seems to be just a desert. And but like it really piqued my interest, and so I created two fictional groups that were both like Mars One and SpaceX, and the Russian and NASA versions of all these groups at once that are actually talking in serious terms about going to Mars and setting up the first interplanetary colony. So I set this one group in Mexico. Well, it's a private organization, and they were building their rocket ship, and they were, learning and figuring out how they were going to survive on Mars and all that. And it's very real. Like there are people at work on these issues right this very minute. And then I set up another group, which was Russian, but I made it clear it was not tied to the government. They were a private group also, but they had sent a team of assassins against the other. So it's a thriller in that sense. All the action takes place on Earth. It's called Crimson Firestorm Mars. And so one of the things that intrigued me is the idea that, and this was in that initial story I read, it's a one-way journey at this stage. Like if you choose to go to Mars, you're never coming back. Not at this stage. We do not have the technology for it. So in a sense, it's like dying. It's like dying to the Earth. Like once you leave, you're gone forever. And that really set my mind thinking, like, what would it be like to voluntarily give up all the things that we love, just the beautiful scenery, going to a rock concert or a ball game of some kind, or the theater or whatever, to a nice restaurant, having all these things that we take for granted, really. And you're saying, okay, I'm going to go live on this freezing cold, forbidding planet in the name of science and, to set up the first interplanetary colony. And, even in the rocket ship that would be sent aloft, you're going to have to be very good at meditation and stilling your body and your mind in order to endure what will take upwards toward a year to get there. And once you're there, you're there. That's it. So, yeah, I wrote this whole novel on it. It's a big novel. It's a 700-page novel. Would make a really incredible movie. But I also wrote a chapter in The Journey Across Forever to kind of bring that kind of idea about the finality of it into this book, which is a very spiritual book. And so it's like Martian theater, I call it, where there is actually, the Buddhists have, a death meditation that they do. So I kind of tied all these things together. And that's what that's all about, and the idea that going to Mars is not like just, traveling across the world. Like it is a major, major undertaking. And I don't think we'll get there anytime as soon as some people might think, like Elon Musk, who claimed he was going to have, 1,000 people there by 2025 or something like that. We're going to have to work on the technology a whole lot more to get someone to Mars and have them set up that colony there.
Yeah, well, he needs to, perfect his rockets to keep them from blowing up first.
That helps.
I'll be honest with you. Well, I would never do what these people are doing, because I think it's backwards thinking, because I think there's other ways of achieving these goals that are kind of beyond our current scientific knowledge. I mean, heck, you could even, through astral travel and meditation, go visit Mars and
that's right.
Hang out there and then come back,
Think of the remote viewers that Colonel Alexander was associated with, Ingo Swann and those kind of people who who've done that. They've actually, like Ingo Swann, was able to remote view Jupiter before scientists on Earth even knew it had rings around it. And he said, there are rings around it. And they said, no, there's no rings around it. Then they sent one of their ships up there, and sure enough, there are rings around it. So there's a lot to be said for the remote viewing, for sure.
But I also admit to having an intense fascination with Mars. Don't ask me why. I don't know. I sure wouldn't want to be stranded there, but there's something about that planet that just strikes a chord with me. Something I'll be exploring in the future, I guess.
Yeah. It's nabbed me as well, and that's why I was inspired to write that book. So it's intriguing, the whole idea of going to the moon or to Mars, but no thanks. I'm not going to go. I love the Earth too much, and I love all the comforts and the beauty and the good things of this world. So this is where I'll stay.
Well, your book is called The Journey Across Forever, a magical, provocative odyssey across the ages, around the world, and into the great beyond. Just came out this summer. Where can people find it?
Well, the publisher is John Hunt Publishing, or it's now changed ownership and it's Collective Inc. But most people are getting it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble websites. And I would sure appreciate anyone getting it on Amazon to put up a review. I would appreciate it very much. And I hope that people find it very inspirational. The core message in the book is that I think we need to see the miraculous in the mundane and the sacred in the profane. And if we do that, we become more holistic. And real magic is about transforming our perceptions. So it's very important to, there's a lot of information in this book, but it really helps to sit and ruminate and to meditate on the messages in there. But it is a path to enlightenment, and I think to freeing the spirit. And to know that life goes on beyond this earth is very much a part of setting the soul free. So all of that is in the book. And it's called The Journey Across Forever. And I thank you, Mark, for having me on your program.
Well, Wayne, thank you for coming on. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I think we have a lot in common in the way we think about things. Yeah. So thank you again for coming on. You're welcome. Take care. I want to thank everybody else for tuning in to another edition of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And as Irene says, you can find us everywhere, people, everywhere. So have a great week. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Be good humans, and we will talk to you all soon. Have a great night.